My name is Claire Morgan, and 2 months ago, my own sister looked me straight in the eye and told me she was ashamed to be related to me. Not because I had committed a crime, not because I had hurt anyone, not because I had failed in life. No. She was ashamed because I fixed trains for a living. The worst part? I spent years helping build the very life she was now using to erase me. And when her world came crashing down in front of hundreds of wedding guests, she was the one begging for my help. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I tell you how my sister's perfect fairy tale wedding turned into the biggest scandal our city had seen in years, let me explain how it all began. I am 35 years old and have worked for the city's public transportation authority for nearly 14 years. Every morning before sunrise, while most people are still asleep, I put on my safety vest, grab my tools, and head underground. I supervise maintenance teams responsible for keeping commuter trains running safely. Thousands of people rely on our work every single day. Doctors getting to hospitals, teachers heading to schools, parents trying to make it home to their children. Most people never think about who keeps those trains moving. I do, and I've always been proud of it. My coworkers respected me because I earned every promotion the hard way. No favors, no shortcuts, no connections, just long hours, hard work, and consistency. But according to my younger sister Vanessa, none of that mattered. Because grease-stained work boots don't look good in photographs next to wealthy politicians and business executives. I should have realized something was wrong the moment she got engaged. The announcement came during a family dinner at my mother's house. Vanessa arrived wearing a massive diamond ring that probably cost more than my first car. The moment she walked through the door, my mother practically burst into tears. "Oh, Claire," she squealed, "your sister is marrying into the Caldwell family." Everyone in the city knew the Caldwells. Their name was everywhere. Politics, real estate, charities, country clubs. If there was a list of the city's most influential families, they were near the top. I hugged Vanessa and congratulated her. At the time, I was genuinely happy for her. She smiled, but something felt off. Cold. Forced. Like she was already uncomfortable being seen standing next to me. I ignored the feeling. After all, she was my sister. Or at least I thought she was. Over the following weeks, social media filled with engagement photos, luxury venues, designer dresses, expensive dinners. Everywhere I looked, Vanessa seemed to be living inside a magazine advertisement. Then one evening, about 6 weeks before the wedding, I noticed something strange. Everyone in the family was discussing wedding plans in a group chat. Guest lists, seating charts, travel arrangements, yet nobody had mentioned my invitation. At first, I assumed it was a simple oversight. Then another week passed. Still nothing. Finally, I decided to ask. I drove to my mother's house on a cool Friday evening. The sun had already disappeared behind the city skyline when I pulled into the driveway. The moment I stepped onto the porch, I heard voices inside. The front door wasn't completely closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But then I heard my own name, and I froze. "She absolutely cannot be there," Vanessa said. My stomach tightened. "What if someone asks questions?" my mother replied. "They will," Vanessa answered immediately. "Ethan's family notices everything." There was a brief silence. Then my mother's voice came again. "We've already told them she's living overseas. We can't change the story now." My heart stopped. "Story? What story?" I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room fell silent. Vanessa's face instantly turned pale. My mother looked like a child caught stealing. I stared at both of them. "What story?" I asked quietly. Neither answered. The tension in the room became unbearable. Finally, Vanessa stood up. Her expression hardened. And in that moment, I barely recognized the person standing in front of me. "Claire," she said, folding her arms, "you're not invited to the wedding." For several seconds, I simply stared at her, certain I had misunderstood. "What?" "You're not invited." The words hit harder the second time. I looked toward my mother. She refused to meet my eyes. "Why?" I asked. Vanessa took a deep breath. Then she delivered the sentence that changed everything. "Because Ethan's family thinks you're living in Europe." I laughed nervously. Surely this was some bizarre misunderstanding. "So tell them the truth." Vanessa shook her head. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" She hesitated. Then she looked directly at me. "Because if they find out you're a train mechanic, they'll judge us." The room seemed to spin. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those years, all those sacrifices, all the times I'd helped this family, and somehow my profession was now an embarrassment. My mother finally spoke. "Claire, please don't make this difficult." I turned toward her. "Difficult?" She sighed dramatically. "Ethan's family comes from a different world. A different world." The words echoed in my head, as though honest work somehow made me less valuable, less worthy, less human. Vanessa stepped closer. "We're asking you to stay away just until the wedding is over." I felt something break inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a rope finally snapping after years of strain. I looked at my sister, then at my mother, and for the first time in my life, I realized neither of them were ashamed of what I did. They were ashamed of who I was. What neither of them understood was that their perfect little lie was already beginning to unravel. And before long, every single person in their carefully constructed world would know exactly who Claire Morgan really was, including the Caldwell family, especially the Caldwell family. The drive home that night felt longer than any journey I had ever taken. The city lights blurred beyond my windshield as Vanessa's words replayed over and over inside my head. "They'll judge us." Not once had she said they would judge me. No. She was worried they would judge her, because somehow my honest career had become a threat to the glamorous future she was trying so desperately to build. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat in the dark for nearly an hour without turning on a single light. The silence was overwhelming. I kept asking myself the same question. How had we gotten here? The answer, unfortunately, stretched back years. Long before designer engagement rings, long before luxury weddings, long before the Caldwell family. It started when our father died. I was 19. Vanessa was 14. Our father had been the kind of man who never complained, even when money was tight, even when the bills piled up, even when he worked 16-hour shifts to keep food on the table. Then one winter morning, he left for work and never came home. A heart attack. Sudden. Unexpected. By dinner time, our entire world had changed. The months that followed were brutal. Medical bills arrived, mortgage payments fell behind, creditors started calling. My mother spent most days crying at the kitchen table. Someone had to step up, and that someone became me. I dropped out of college after my second year, a decision I never talked about because there was no point dwelling on it. The family needed money. So I got a job, then another, then a third. I worked construction during the day, stocked shelves at a grocery store at night, and delivered packages on weekends. While my friends were attending classes and planning careers, I was trying to keep our house from being repossessed. I never regretted it. Not then, because I believed family meant sacrifice. I believed we were all fighting for the same future. I was wrong. Over the years, things slowly improved. I landed a stable position with the Transportation Authority. I worked my way up through the maintenance division. The pay became decent. The hours became manageable. For the first time, we could breathe. Vanessa graduated high school, then college. Every semester, whenever she fell short on tuition, I quietly helped. Whenever she needed textbooks, I paid. When she wanted to spend a summer studying abroad, I covered the plane ticket. She always promised she would pay me back someday. I never asked her to. She was my sister. That's what family does. At least that's what I thought. But looking back now, there were warning signs everywhere. As Vanessa climbed higher socially, she became increasingly obsessed with appearances. Designer handbags, luxury vacations, exclusive clubs. Status became her favorite language. Whenever someone bought a bigger house, she noticed. Whenever someone drove a more expensive car, she noticed. Whenever someone married into wealth, she definitely noticed. Nothing was ever enough. The strange thing was that the more successful she became, the more embarrassed she seemed to be around me. She stopped mentioning my job to her friends. Then she stopped introducing me entirely. Sometimes at social events, she referred to me simply as a relative, as though saying the word sister would somehow lower her value. At first, I ignored it. Then I excused it. Then I stopped thinking about it altogether. Until that night at my mother's house forced me to confront the truth. The following week was miserable. I buried myself in work. My crews noticed something was wrong. I tried to hide it. Failed. One morning, my assistant supervisor, Marcus, caught me staring blankly at a maintenance report. You okay? He asked. Just tired. He raised an eyebrow. That's not tired. I laughed. Since when did you become a therapist? Since you started looking like somebody stole your dog. I smiled despite myself. Marcus had worked with me for 8 years. He was one of the few people who could read me effortlessly. Eventually, I told him part of the story. Not everything. Just enough. When I finished, he shook his head. You know what I don't understand? What? People spend their whole lives wanting respect. Okay. And then they look down on the people who actually earn it. His words stayed with me. Because deep down, I knew he was right. The following Sunday, another surprise arrived. A black luxury SUV pulled into the parking lot outside my apartment building. I noticed it from my balcony. A few moments later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Immediately, my stomach tightened. Something told me this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. I answered. Hello? We're outside. No greeting, no apology, no warmth, just a command. 10 minutes later, Vanessa and my mother were sitting in my living room. Neither had come to repair our relationship. Neither had come to apologize. The moment they sat down, I knew exactly why they were there. They wanted something. Vanessa crossed her legs and looked around my apartment. The same apartment I'd spent years paying for myself. The same apartment she once praised for being cozy. Now she examined it like a museum exhibit. Finally, she got to the point. There's something we need you to do. I almost laughed. Of course there was. I leaned back in my chair. What? My mother exchanged a glance with Vanessa. Then Vanessa spoke. During wedding week, we need you to stay away from downtown. For a second, I thought she was joking. She wasn't. What? Ethan's family will be hosting events all week. And we don't want anyone accidentally running into you. I stared at her, speechless. My mother jumped in. It would just make everything easier. Easier. There was that word again. As if I were some problem that needed managing. As if I were a stain that needed hiding. Vanessa leaned forward. You don't understand how much is riding on this marriage. No, I said quietly. I think I do. The room became silent. Because for the first time, they realized I wasn't going to cooperate. Not this time. Not anymore. And although none of us knew it yet, their carefully constructed fantasy was only days away from colliding headfirst with reality. A collision that would destroy far more than a wedding. 3 days after Vanessa and my mother left my apartment, the biggest transportation emergency of the year hit the city. At 5:30 on a rainy Tuesday morning, a critical electrical failure shut down 3 major train lines during rush hour. Thousands of commuters were stranded. City officials were panicking. News helicopters circled overhead. I immediately took charge. For nearly 6 exhausting hours, my crews worked nonstop, replacing damaged equipment and restoring power before the entire transit network collapsed. By noon, trains were moving again. The crisis had been averted. I was standing on the platform reviewing reports when a sharply dressed man approached me. I recognized him instantly. Charles Caldwell, Ethan's father, one of the most influential businessmen in the state. To my surprise, he walked directly toward me and extended his hand. You're Claire Morgan? Yes, sir. I've been told you're the reason the city isn't completely gridlocked today. I smiled politely. Just doing my job. Charles studied me for a moment, then his eyes narrowed slightly. Morgan? He repeated. As in Vanessa Morgan? My heart skipped a beat. She's my sister. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then a strange expression crossed his face, one that immediately made me uneasy. Interesting, he said quietly. Very interesting. As he walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. What I didn't know was that Charles Caldwell had just discovered the first crack in the lie Vanessa had spent months building. And unlike most people, Charles Caldwell never ignored a mystery. The next 48 hours passed quietly. Too quietly. I focused on work and tried to forget about Vanessa's wedding. Then, late Thursday afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. Miss Morgan? A professional voice asked. Speaking. This is Daniel Reeves from Caldwell Holdings. Mr. Caldwell would like to meet with you. My stomach tightened. Why would Charles Caldwell want to meet me? The following morning, I arrived at the Caldwell corporate headquarters. Within minutes, I was escorted into a massive executive office overlooking the city skyline. Charles Caldwell stood beside the window. He didn't waste time with small talk. Instead, he placed a thin folder on the desk. "My investigators completed a routine background review," he said calmly. A chill ran down my spine. Then he opened the folder. Inside were photographs of me, family records, public documents, and copies of social media posts featuring Vanessa. Charles looked directly into my eyes. "Your sister told my family she was an only child." The room fell silent. I said nothing. Charles continued. "She also claimed her father died years ago and her mother raised her alone." I felt sick. Every lie was worse than the last. Finally, Charles sat down. "What exactly is going on, Claire?" For the first time, someone was asking for my side of the story. So I told him everything. The lies. The humiliation. The wedding invitation I never received. The demand that I disappear. The shame Vanessa felt toward my profession. When I finished, Charles remained silent for several moments. Then his expression hardened. Not toward me. Toward Vanessa. Toward the lies. Toward the deception. Finally, he stood. "I built my company by loading trucks in a warehouse," he said quietly. "My father was a mechanic." His jaw tightened. "And someone thinks honest work is something to be ashamed of?" I immediately knew the wedding was in serious trouble. What I didn't know was that Charles had already made a decision. And by the time Vanessa walked down the aisle on Saturday morning, her perfect fairy tale was about to become a nightmare. A nightmare she never saw coming. Saturday morning arrived under dark gray skies. For the first time in weeks, I felt peaceful. I made coffee, sat by my apartment window, and watched the city wake up. Across town, Vanessa was probably getting ready for the biggest day of her life. The designer dress, the luxury venue, the powerful guests, everything she had dreamed about, everything she had sacrificed our relationship to achieve. I thought about turning off my phone and spending the day completely alone. Then my phone rang. "Vanessa?" I ignored it. 30 seconds later, it rang again, then again, and again. Within 20 minutes, I had over 30 missed calls. Not just from Vanessa, from my mother, from relatives, from numbers I didn't recognize. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Then a text message appeared. "Claire, please answer." It's a disaster. My heart began to race. Moments later, the phone rang again. This time I answered. The second I picked up, I heard sobbing, not crying. Sobbing. Vanessa was completely hysterical. "Claire, please," she screamed. "You have to come here right now." I sat up straight. What happened? "The wedding is stopped." My stomach dropped. What? Charles knows everything. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Vanessa's voice broke. He found out about the lies. I closed my eyes. So it had happened. The truth had finally caught up with them. "Claire," she begged, "please come. He's refusing to continue the ceremony unless you show up." The irony was almost unbelievable. Just days earlier, they had wanted me hidden from the entire city. Now, they needed me more than anyone else. I looked out the window at the cloudy skyline. For the first time in my life, the power had completely shifted. And before this day was over, every guest in that ballroom was going to learn exactly who Claire Morgan was, including the Caldwell family. The luxury ballroom was already in chaos when I arrived. Guests stood in small groups, whispering frantically. Some looked confused. Others looked horrified. The wedding ceremony, scheduled to begin nearly an hour earlier, had completely stopped. As soon as I stepped through the entrance, dozens of heads turned toward me. They knew who I was, or at least they knew I was the reason everything had come to a halt. Near the altar, I spotted Vanessa. Her expensive makeup was ruined. Tears streamed down her face. Beside her stood my mother, looking pale and terrified. The moment they saw me, both rushed forward. "Thank God you're here," my mother whispered desperately. Vanessa grabbed my arm. "Claire, please listen to me." I calmly pulled my arm away. "No." Her face crumpled. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Before she could continue, a deep voice interrupted. "Miss Morgan." The room instantly fell silent. Charles Caldwell stood near the altar, surrounded by family members and legal advisors. His expression was cold, controlled, dangerously controlled. He gestured for me to join him. I walked forward. Every eye in the ballroom followed me. When I reached him, Charles turned to the crowd. "Before any ceremony takes place, there are some facts that need to be addressed." Vanessa's face lost all color. My mother looked as though she might faint. Charles held up a folder. The Caldwell family was deliberately misled about the Morgan family. Murmurs spread throughout the room. Then Charles looked directly at me. Miss Morgan, would you like to tell everyone the truth? For years, I had been ignored, dismissed, hidden, erased. Now an entire ballroom was waiting to hear my voice, and for the first time, nobody could stop me. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The truth was finally about to come out, and once it did, there would be no going back. I slowly turned toward the crowd. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on me. For years, my family had tried to make me invisible. Now they couldn't stop people from seeing me. My name is Claire Morgan, I began calmly. And despite what some people in this room were told, I am very much alive. A wave of shocked murmurs spread across the ballroom. I could see guests exchanging confused glances. Vanessa lowered her head. My mother looked ready to collapse. I continued. 3 months ago, my sister became engaged to Ethan Caldwell. Instead of introducing me as her older sister, she told his family I was no longer part of her life. The room grew even quieter. Why? Charles asked. I looked directly at Vanessa, because she was ashamed of my job. A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. I pulled out my phone. Last week, my mother and sister came to my apartment and asked me to stay hidden until after the wedding. Then I pressed play. The recording filled the room. Vanessa's voice was unmistakable. You don't understand, Claire? People like the Caldwells expect a certain image. If they find out you're a train mechanic, they'll judge us. The silence that followed was devastating. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The truth had landed, and it hit harder than any lie ever could. Ethan slowly turned toward Vanessa. His face was filled with disbelief. You actually said that? Vanessa burst into tears. Ethan, please let me explain. Explain what? He asked. That you were embarrassed by your own sister? She opened her mouth. No words came out. Because there was no explanation. There was only the truth. And everyone in the ballroom had just heard it. For a moment, all eyes shifted to Charles Caldwell, the man who held the future of the wedding in his hands. His expression revealed nothing, but the look in his eyes told me everything. The wedding wasn't the only thing hanging by a thread anymore. Vanessa's entire future was. And Charles was about to make a decision that would change all of our lives forever. Charles Caldwell slowly stepped forward. The ballroom was so silent that you could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers overhead. He looked first at Vanessa, then at my mother. Finally, he turned toward the guests. In all my years of business, he said calmly, I've dealt with dishonest competitors, corrupt executives, and people willing to do almost anything for money. His voice hardened. But I have never met anyone willing to discard their own family for the sake of appearances. Vanessa broke down completely. Please, Mr. Caldwell, she cried. I love Ethan. Charles didn't even blink. Love built on lies isn't love. The words hit the room like a hammer. Ethan stood motionless beside the altar. The disappointment on his face was worse than anger. It was the look of a man realizing he never truly knew the person he planned to marry. Vanessa rushed toward him. Ethan, please, we can fix this. He took a step back. No, Vanessa, you can't. Tears streamed down her face. My mother suddenly stepped forward. This is all a misunderstanding. Charles turned toward her. A misunderstanding? His voice was ice cold. You lied repeatedly to my family for months. Nobody dared speak. Then Charles delivered the final blow. The wedding is canceled. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Vanessa froze. My mother's knees nearly gave out. But Charles wasn't finished. Effective immediately, all business discussions between our families are terminated. My mother's face turned ghostly white. The room erupted into whispers. Everyone knew what that meant. The partnerships, the investments, the opportunities, gone. All of them. Years of social climbing vanished in a matter of seconds. Vanessa collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. For the first time in her life, she couldn't charm, manipulate, or explain her way out of the consequences. The truth had finally caught up with her. As guests began quietly leaving the ballroom, I stood there watching the empire of lies my family had built crumble before my eyes. And deep down, I realized something important. I wasn't happy because they were suffering. I was relieved because I was finally free. Free from pretending. Free from seeking their approval. Free from people who only valued me when I was useful to them. But the biggest surprise was still waiting for me. Because as the ballroom emptied, Charles Caldwell approached me with an offer that would change my future forever. As the last guests filtered out of the ballroom, Charles Caldwell approached me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The chaos behind us was still unfolding. Vanessa sat crying beside her mother. Family members whispered in stunned disbelief. Everything they had worked so hard to build was collapsing around them. Yet Charles seemed completely focused on something else. Me. "Claire," he said, extending his hand, "I'd like to discuss an opportunity." I raised an eyebrow. "An opportunity?" He nodded. "During my investigation, I learned a great deal about you." That caught me off guard. Charles continued. "I spoke with city officials." He paused. "Transportation executives." Another pause. "And several people who have worked alongside you for years." I wasn't sure where this was going. Then he smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from him all day. Every single person told me the same thing. I waited. They said if something absolutely has to be done right, Claire Morgan is the person you call. For the first time that day, I felt myself blush. Charles gestured toward the empty ballroom. "People like Vanessa spend their lives chasing status." Then he pointed toward me. "You spent yours building value." The distinction hit harder than I expected. Because he was right. I had spent years proving myself, not through appearances, not through connections, but through results. Charles reached into his jacket and handed me a business card. "I oversee transportation infrastructure investments in 7 major cities." I looked down at the card. The numbers attached to the company were staggering. Then he said something I never expected. "I want you to lead our new regional operations division." My eyes widened. "What?" Charles laughed. "That was my exact reaction when I reviewed your record." I stared at him. This couldn't be real. The position would be several levels above anything I had ever imagined for myself. The salary alone would completely change my life. "Why me?" I finally asked. Charles didn't hesitate. "Because competence is rare." Then his expression became serious. "And because people who respect honest work deserve opportunities." For a moment, I couldn't speak. After everything that had happened, after years of being treated like I wasn't good enough, someone was finally seeing my worth. Not despite my work, because of it. I accepted the offer 3 weeks later. The promotion transformed my career. Within months, I was overseeing transportation operations across multiple cities. The teams grew larger. The responsibilities grew greater. But one thing never changed. I never forgot where I started. Because every time I walked into a boardroom, I remembered the mechanic everyone once considered an embarrassment, the sister they tried to hide, the woman they thought wasn't good enough. And that made what happened next even more satisfying. Because while my life was moving forward, my family's was moving in the exact opposite direction. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. The new position challenged me in ways I had never imagined. I traveled regularly, managed major infrastructure projects, led teams of hundreds of employees. For the first time in my life, I wasn't simply surviving. I was thriving. Ironically, the people who had spent years looking down on my career suddenly found themselves struggling to build one of their own. The fallout from the canceled wedding had been devastating. News of the scandal spread quickly through social circles, not because anyone cared about me being a mechanic, but because people were shocked by how Vanessa and my mother had treated their own family. Their reputation never recovered. Former friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. Business contacts quietly distanced themselves. The social world they had spent years chasing simply moved on without them. And once that happened, they discovered something painful. Most of those relationships had never been real in the first place. A few months after the wedding, I received a voicemail from my mother. Then another, and another. For weeks, she kept trying. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she apologized. Sometimes she blamed everyone except herself. I never responded. Not because I hated her, but because I had finally learned the difference between forgiveness and access. I could forgive her without reopening the door. Vanessa reached out too. Her messages were shorter, more honest. For the first time in her life, she seemed to understand the damage she had caused. But some wounds take years to heal, and some relationships never fully recover. One evening, after a long day at work, I found myself standing inside a maintenance depot during a routine inspection. Several mechanics were working on a train car. Their uniforms were stained with grease. Their hands were dirty. They were laughing while solving a complicated mechanical problem. For a moment, I just stood there watching. Then I smiled, because those workers reminded me of the person I used to be. The person my family had considered embarrassing. The person they tried so hard to hide. And yet that same person had built a life they could never take away. Not with lies, not with shame, not with rejection. As I walked back toward my office, I realized something important. The greatest victory wasn't watching my family's downfall. The greatest victory was discovering that my worth had never depended on their approval. It never depended on status, or money, or social circles. It depended on character, on hard work, on integrity, the things that remain long after appearances fade. If there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of honest work. The people who judge you for earning an honest living are often the same people who have no idea how to build a meaningful life themselves. Respect isn't found in titles, it isn't found in wealth, and it certainly isn't found in the opinions of people who only value appearances. Real respect is earned, one day, one decision, one act of integrity at a time. And that's something no one can ever take from you, not even family.